All right. We are live. Hello, Jeffrey Dean Bretches. Welcome back to our podcast. How are
All
you?
righty. Well, thank you. Glad to be here and welcome back yourself.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a hiatus for several different reasons, but I'm so glad we could spend this time together. And for me, I don't know about how it works for you, but for me, just taking time out of all of the things that are clamor for my attention anyway, to have a conversation with a friend that we go way back and then talk about stuff that actually can make a difference in the way we see life and the way we operate. That's highly valuable time well spent.
Amen. And you know what else is nice? It's nice to see a couple of Vanguard alumni that are still alive from, who
Right. We're
from
not dead
years.
yet. As they said in the Monty Python, I'm not dead yet.
Or as they said in Princess Bride, I've been mostly dead all day.
Exactly right. For those who may have not tuned into previous episodes, this is our 5th episode on timeless wisdom. Jeff and I met back in the 1900s, back when we were college students, and we toured together with a gospel group from our college and had so many great adventures and have been friends all along. In fact, feels more like family than friendship at this point. But I look at our faces today, Jeff, and it's not exactly the same amount of hair that we had when we first met.
You're a little shiny here.
That's right. A little more hair on the chin and a little less on the forehead.
That's right.
Yeah. So the reason Jeff and I are doing this, so at least from my side, is I've just been fascinated with Jeff's voracious reading habits. He's been really diving into books, some that are current and some that are ancient. And Jeff, just give a little recap for those that might not have tuned in before as to what kind of prompted you into this journey into reading at volume, right? What's pricked your heart? What's the motivation for that for you?
Well, originally it was about 7 years ago. I was taking on a new position at work, and I felt like I had a lot to learn, and so I committed to reading 60 books that year in the business field. And then at the end of that year, my professional coach said, "Did you read any spiritual books?" And I went, "Well, my Bible." "Did you read any?" And which is not a bad place to start, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
But in the last few years, what's very much been oh, and by the way, I hit 61 books that year, overachiever. A couple of small ones, but okay. Was that, in life, we can go about it just whatever comes our way and have whatever success that we have. And by success, I mean success in our person, not necessarily riches or esteem, but in fulfilling life's meaning, right?
Yeah.
Or we can dive in and learn more about our context in which we live, and then know better what's happening around us, why people act the way they do, why we act the way we do, what's the nature of our existence, what can we expect or what should we expect. And so I really began diving into history and science, a little less than history, but history and a little bit of science, and theology, and most recently into more ancient history, reading a lot of the early church fathers type of stuff, even ascetics on prayer, and just learning what the context is so that we can put our minds into that mode and really we can focus our minds. If we don't know what to focus on, if we don't know what's coming at us or what's getting away from us, we don't really know how to hold on to what's important. So I'm trying to learn my context.
I love that. I love the intentionality of that, right? Just this morning, I was listening to a conversation, and one of the people in the conversation said, that a cat doesn't have to work very hard to be a cat. It just comes natural, right? It's just all built into the system. But humans, on the other hand, there is a requirement, or there's certainly the invitation for us to better our minds, our bodies, our social connections, our understanding, right, of our context. That it doesn't just happen, but we really have the capacity, right, in the invitation to increase our awareness, to increase our understanding, to gather wisdom, as we're talking about here. And I love that challenge, right? So I think there's part of us, or part of me anyway, that wishes it did all come naturally. It didn't require so much work. However, another way to look at that is that that work that we put in, the time that we put in to read, to understand, to apply, to discuss, to share, actually enhances the quality of our life, or certainly our experience of life. And so there's a payoff, right? Rather than just you get what you get,
Right.
you can actually increase your experience of life and the meaning that you put into it, as you said.
Exactly, exactly. Like you said, a cat doesn't have to learn anything more than being a cat, right? And as humans, if all we did was learn the physical side of things, right, which is
Yeah.
what the cat does. The cat doesn't have it doesn't have that soul type of. I don't want to get into any arguments with any pet lovers because I have pets. Don't get me wrong, but that spiritual side of connection with God and thinking, critical thinking type of stuff, um, we could be babies and just grow up and learn all the basic living stuff. I got to eat, I got to go shower, I got to do all this stuff. But if that's where we stop, we're not going to engage the rest of our human existence, which would be that critical thinking and moving into relationships, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. So that really, to me, that touches on the fact of the limitations that we have in our life are often the limitations that we've actually put on ourselves by not pushing against what might be perceived limits. Perhaps the limits are just our perception, and reading and discussing and sharing, crafting words, whether it's written or spoken, even the dialogue that we're having right now. I think it's easy to underestimate how valuable that is, because what we're doing here in real time, and for those that might tune in live or after the fact, is wrestling, right, with ideas. What do I think? And is that all there is to know, which is certainly a dangerous place to go? Or, can I grab another perspective and add it to mine and mix it together and test it and decide, hey, you know what I've known so far got me to where I am, but I don't want to get stuck here for the rest of my life. So how do I move forward? How do I grow? How do I expand? And I think you are modeling, right, very well, that you can gather wisdom, you can gather understanding and knowledge and context, not just from whatever's available at the moment, whatever's streaming on your phone, whatever is the de jour information, but there is a whole history that has and the records that we have through books and so many other opportunities to understand where did other people come from, right? And how did they navigate life in their context, and then see how does that apply to me now, right?
Certainly. And I think one of the things that I didn't mention, which I may have mentioned in one of our conversations before, is that, growing up in the church, I learned a lot of the story. I learned a lot of the ethic and the moral. Uh, I had zeal, but not without knowledge, but zeal without wisdom, I guess you would say.
Mm,
And so when I came up against struggles in my life, I knew the what, but I didn't necessarily know as much about the why.
mm, yeah.
And in my studies now, with gaining that context, it's given me more of that why, which strengthens the what.
Yes. Wow. That's you said a mouthful there, Jeff. Really good stuff. So let's jump into this idea of context versus content, right? The what is the content, and the context is the application. So first of all, we'll talk a little bit about knowledge versus wisdom. you made a great distinction there. Knowledge is facts and figures and information. Wisdom, as I understand it, and as I'm using it here in this conversation, is applying it, right? It's the actions that you take based on the knowledge that you've got. And I think there's a tendency, perhaps because of the images that we get in culture, to think that a wise person is the one sitting on top of the hill dispensing wise words, right? But that's not necessarily what wisdom, the value of wisdom. The value of wisdom is in that understanding that you've picked up from your context and from the context of others, understanding how does that apply now so that I make better choices, so that I get better outcomes, so that I grow, so that I expand. And I want to throw this back to you. What's your distinction between knowledge and wisdom, and how does that help you in this path that you're on?
Wow, now you're asking me hard questions. Don't you have some filler here so I don't have to think?
Right.
Now I got to think. Okay.
You are a thinker, brother. So here you go.
well, there's wisdom in different what shall I say, different aspects of life. There's wisdom in married life. There's wisdom in raising kids. There's wisdom in running the type of work that you do. But there's also a spiritual wisdom, right? And the Bible says that if you look into the mirror and you see yourself, right? And then you walk away and you forget what you saw, what's the value to that?
Yeah, right.
And I think in my case, if I look in the mirror and walk away and forget, this is what you got. If I really remembered, I'd go shave and get a haircut. Okay.
Yeah.
That aside, it's what we do with what we learned and what we've seen, and in between what we've learned and how we apply it correctly is that place of experimentation, push, obedience, putting our faith in what we've learned, that it is the right thing and that we can go forward with it. And as we implement it, we'll learn from that process and then really know how to run ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So the illustration that comes to mind, and many years ago, I taught the Alpha course, which was established by Nicky Gumbel years ago to help people through the basics and their understanding of what does it mean to be a human being, and especially in context of the spirituality, right? And so he was making this distinction between belief and faith, and these are two words that came up in this conversation already. And he talked about this back in the 1920s. There was a very famous tightrope walker who would put on a demonstration over Niagara Falls. They'd string the tightrope over Niagara Falls and gather a big crowd, and he would walk out on the tightrope and walk back, and the crowd's all applauding, right? And he said, "Who believes that I could walk across Niagara Falls and back, with a wheelbarrow?" And they're all like, "Yeah, we believe you can do that." So he'd bring a wheelbarrow onto the tightrope and he'd walk it out, he'd walk it back, and the crowd goes wild. He says, "Who believes that I could put a mannequin in this wheelbarrow and I could go across and back without falling?" And they're like, "Yeah, we believe you can do that." So he puts a mannequin in the wheelbarrow, it goes across, brings it back. And he says, "Now who believes that I could put an actual human being in this wheelbarrow and I could wheel it back and forth across Niagara Falls on this tightrope?" And they're like, "Of course you can. We believe. And his next question was, "All right, who's in?" Right? And the crowd goes silent. And
Of course.
Yeah. And the illustration is really challenging to me, and I love what he's saying here is that I can say I believe something and maybe even feel that I believe something, but if I'm not willing to step into the metaphorical wheelbarrow, right, and put to test what it is I say or I think that I believe, then is it really faith? He's saying this is the distinction between belief and faith. Faith means that I will take action on what I say or think I believe. And I think that that's that intersection that we're talking about, where wisdom isn't just a gathering of information or gathering of knowledge, but it is now, how do I take what I've learned and apply it to my real world, my context, right? And that's why I'm fascinated by your journey, Jeff, is because you're gathering information and knowledge from people who lived in a different context. They might even be contemporaries, but they live in a different state or different country, a different world than you do. And so, how do you navigate taking this good and helpful information from other people's perspectives and put it into your own context? And that's kind of uh, a tough question, but can you think of a particular thing that you've learned along the way that you said, "Oh, this really applies now to my parenting or my business or my understanding of self or God"?
Well, good question. And of course, you always have good questions, Joe. I recently finished reading a book called Unseen Warfare. It was originally written by a gentleman with the last name Scopoli. And he was a Catholic priest, I believe. This is back in the 1600s. It was edited by, or revised or edited by Nicholas of the Holy Mountain, and then edited again by Theophan the Recluse. So it was it was a Catholic who wrote it, and then it was two Eastern Orthodox priests who rewrote it, and the introduction was by Hodges, a earlier American theologian that was Protestant. How do you like that? He was wrote the introduction of it. It's a great book. And it was about the ascetic life and unseen warfare, what we go through. And it was particularly focused on prayer and particularly fighting the battle, unseen warfare, fighting the battle that we fight against temptations, against discouragements, against false accusations, against pride, all of the different things that come against us. And how does the ascetic in that setting, right? How do they handle that? And it talked about confession to your confessor. It talked about how to consider oneself, if you're accused, to gladly accept how you're accused, or that you were accused, and humility. And it gave lots of examples of how that worked in their setting.
Right.
And it recorded different instances where, let me give you one here. The guy says, the underling says to his confessor, he says, somebody has accused me of something, right? And he says, okay, what should I do about it? And his confessor says, well, go to, did I tell this one already? I may have. Go to the graveyard and yell at the graves. So he goes and yells at the graves. He comes back and the next day, and his confessor says, okay, how did it go? Well, I went and did what you told me to. And how did they respond? They're dead. They didn't respond. Oh, right. Okay. So he says, what should I do? And he says, well, tonight, go and scream a little louder at them, and then come back tomorrow. So he comes back the next day after having done so. And he says, well, what was the outcome? Did screaming louder work? He says, no, nothing happened. They didn't respond. Okay. One more time. Let's go back and give it all you've got. Let it all out. Scream at the headstones or the gravesite.
Yeah.
He does it. I mean, he gives it everything. He's really serious. He comes back and he says, I did it. Nothing happened. I'm not getting it. And he says, exactly. He says, when you're accused, you need to act like those gravestones. It doesn't matter how much they yell at you, how vehement they get. You need to not react. And so that was a little a story, but an illustration. And then it got me thinking about, when Jesus says, if somebody sues you, make it right with him immediately on your way before you have to go to court. Or if somebody takes your coat, give him the other one also. It kind of gave me some perspective. When you're slapped on the cheek, turn the other one. It gave me some of the perspective of how to die to the knee-jerk reaction of protecting ourselves, and kind of how to put it into use and link it to what Jesus said. And here's an illustration. So I learned a lot of illustrations from these gentlemen, a lot of illustrations of, when the enemy attacks the mind and how to focus your mind and how to pray through that and everything, all from writings that went way, way back and was based on the experience even of the Desert Fathers that they were even referring to.
Wow. That's a great illustration. I'm glad you shared that story because it really painted a picture that I could follow along with. And it's such a great reminder and a good illustration that because of when something was written down doesn't make it less or more applicable, right? Less or more wise. Now, the particulars of the story may be very specific to the writer and to their experience. And so I think that's the confusion that happens sometimes in my own head is, all right, so what the person had said in the, let's say a Stoic philosopher, seems like, well, that's a whole nother world, right? It's a different part of the world, a different part of time. How in the world am I supposed to gather any wisdom from that, and how does it apply? But it's that opportunity that you're talking about to hear what they're saying and glean the principles, right? Glean the meaning behind it, right? You can strip it of the context specific to what they were talking about. That's how they learned it because that was their context. And then you can find the nuggets of truth, the wisdom in there that then can be applied into your life in the very present. And I think that's just something we can easily forget that's even available to us or discount when really I think this is a matter of getting into what does truth mean. There's practical wisdom, right? Like I know that it's really important that I brush my teeth 2 times a day, that I floss, right? That I change the oil in my car a certain amount of time. And knowing that is true helps guide, right? What do I do so that I have best possible results? Or I could ignore it and I can have the car break down and my teeth fall out. That's my choice. But it's that understanding, right, that we're talking about, that wisdom is practical. It may seem ethereal, it may seem esoteric, but there is the application. That's what makes us wise, isn't understanding what it means, but finding out how can I apply it in my everyday experience.
Wouldn't it be interesting if there were people who didn't take into consideration context and didn't take into consideration history and what's been written and what's been discussed throughout the ages, and just came up with their own ideas and called that wisdom? Would that not be weird?
Well, yes and no, right? Because I think we do that all the time.
We do that all the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of things that you read, I keep going back to the Bible because that's my main squeeze. Okay, my main gig,
Right.
The Bible. And you might be wondering why in the world here I am, 21st century now, and I'm reading Corinthians, and he says, don't offer food to idols.
Yeah.
What?
Say what?
Did they used to do that? I guess they did, right? Don't offer food to idols. An idol is nothing. There's not even a spirit in the idol. Now, I know that they would use the idols to coax the demonic spirit to be a quote unquote god to manifest from the idol. But the idol was wood or bronze or bronze covered in gold or whatever you might have. I'm thinking, why would that be such a big deal? And if you go to someone's house and they say this was offered to an idol, this meat, consider their conscience and whether that's a good, and whether you're going to hurt their conscience by eating or not eating. And I'm thinking, what in the world? I'm reading in the book of Hebrews, and he says, like they did in the wilderness, when he's talking about the faith and the Israelites in the wilderness, many of them died because why? Because they would result to drunkenness, feasting, and pagan festivities, some of which would be offering food to idols, et cetera, et cetera. And I got to thinking, okay, that's so then, it's so not now. We're like, okay, what's an idol? Okay, idol is I like to eat too many hot dogs. Okay, well, okay, if you will. I mean, we're so past that. Well, why was it so important for him to say it in that time? Well, when you understand that Abraham lived toward the middle of the Bronze Age in Canaan after he relocated, and there was idol worship throughout that area, right? Mm-hmm. And they were chosen by God to become a new people, and God, being not a demon, not an angel, but the only God, right, has to show them, how the right way to live is. And then when you get into, why are they still talking about, that's Exodus. Why are they talking about that to the Corinthians? Well, because in Greece, as you know, we have the philosophers, and they're all worshiping gods. Now, some are saying they're gods, some are saying they're demons, some are saying they're good demons and bad demons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we either placate them or get them to do something good for us. By the way, the demons always have a bad disposition, so I'm not sure how they're going to give good to us. This is known by the philosophers, and I'm almost there.
Right. Oh, I like this.
I'm long-winded.
I like where you're going.
And so Paul is speaking to that time period. Jesus, when God brings Jesus into the scene to reveal the way to God, God amazingly chose to reveal himself in fullness at the end of the Bronze Age within our time. How do I know that? Because at the end of the Bronze Age, he had already established Israel. Israel had all of the form and foreshadowing of Christ. And then you've got this proliferation of the worship of the gods in Greece and then in Rome. And Jesus comes right into the middle of that Roman Empire. And he's casting out demons, and everybody knows what he's talking about because they know all about the scenic plays. They know all about the gladiators. They know all about temple worship. They know about all of these things, right? Jesus is delivering from all of those things. And then Paul is then talking to those after Christ's resurrection. Paul's talking to those who are still living and moving in that arena, trying to learn their best and do their best, right? Why do we need to know that today? And the reason is because the demons didn't go anywhere. They're still here. And the angels, and God's still up there. And now we have a way to get there. Okay, now let me back up just one real quick second. I finished reading a book by Eric Klein called 1177 BC, the fall of civilization in the Bronze Age. And that put into context the Eastern Mediterranean for me and the time period. And then when I realized that Abraham was brought down right in the middle of that Bronze Age, and how the records, the Pharaoh's records and some of the records in Babylon and the Hittite records, some of the trade and business records on the tablets, mentions things that connect all of this together. And then I've been reading City of God by St. Augustine. Okay, that is a tome and a half.
Right.
And it's translated into English that is still hard to read and still hard to keep track of. And I've just read the first third of it. And he has gone so far into idol worship in Greece and Rome and the demons, the angels, God, the interactions. And when you then put together what was happening in that time, what God did to reveal himself against these false gods, what Jesus came in the middle of that, brought us to God. We don't need a demon intermediary to the gods. More on that later, right?
Yeah.
He's that mediator. And then Paul's talking about don't imitate or worship the gods. And then today, how does that affect me today? I put all of that into context. It helps me realize why it's so important what we do and how we worship and what we bring into our lives. And then it opens in me an understanding of how the ancients saw those demons, what characteristics demons and angels had to them. And then I can compare that to what the biblical text says. And then I can compare that to what the early fathers were saying their warfare was. And then I can connect that to what is my warfare?
Yes.
How do I get through it? Why and where am I going? And then I can mind blow, little emoji.
Right. Wow. So that's a beautiful context. It's a great journey. And I've got a leaf blower right outside the window. So you're probably going to drown me out here for a second. But so as I'm listening to you and I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone who's tuning in and may not have any frame of reference or very little frame of reference to all these things that you just talked about. I think what I draw from that and want to help all of us understand is that understanding the context of how history is unfolding isn't simple necessarily, isn't necessarily easy, but it's worth investigating. And when you took all these different pieces that you're reading and you start to see the connections and you start to see sort of the bigger picture that weaves it together, and suddenly it makes sense and you can apply it, and like you said, blows your mind, and you see, wow, all of these pieces are part of a big puzzle, as am I right now today in this conversation. And so I can, right, if I have this opportunity to gather this information and see, wow, I had no idea until I did the work how important this was and how practical it is and how applicable it is and how, as you said, it can free my mind from the limitations of what I've been taught or what the world is telling me, or the limitations of my own experience. And so I don't know how to say this necessarily in the best way, but I love this. I love this opportunity, right, to take our limited understanding and to expand it, not just by the conversations and the experiences that we have with our everyday friends, but in addition to that, not to discount that at all, but in addition to that, to be able to see it in a bigger picture, to get more of a bird's eye view and say, what's happening today in my life, in my family, in my work is part of a much bigger context, right? A historical context. And that if I am willing to see the patterns and the habits and the truths, right? The nuggets from there, then I do have that opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I can make a better choice. I can show up better. I don't have to be stuck in the ruts and the patterns of my own limited experience. I don't know if I said that very well, but does that make sense to you?
It does. It does. And I think everybody, except for perhaps there may be some that are totally self-unaware, but I think the large majority of us know that we don't know everything, know that there's something more we could learn, know that we could do things better. And we can feel stuck and not know how to move forward.
Yeah.
And how to gain that wisdom.
Right. Yeah. And I think the natural tendency is for me when I get stuck is what's the conventional wisdom of the day? What's the low hanging fruit? What's the quick, easy answer that may placate my feelings in the moment, but really won't put me on a better trajectory, right? So I don't repeat those patterns. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's really good. And when you think about it, when you think about a really effective communicator of a particular subject as a professor or as a therapist, as a minister, the ones that really I think are the ones that are most effective are the ones that are seeing today's images, today's problems, today's challenges in a bigger context to say, hey, you know what, it's not like this has never happened before. It's not like I'm the only person that ever went through this particular challenge. In fact, right, the challenges that I face, they feel very personal, but there's a lot of universal truths there that I can glean from, so that, if I'm willing to ask and to learn and to adopt and to, as you said earlier in this conversation, to try things out, to test and say, hey, here's a different idea, here's a different way of doing things. And I do know at the very least that if I keep doing the same old thing, expecting a different result, well, that's the definition of insanity. But on my own, I might not be able to come up with a different idea, a different solution, a different avenue, a different thing to try. So through the conversations with my friends, through the books that I read, getting that context that you're getting, it expands your toolbox of ways to apply, right, to whatever it is that you're trying to fix or whatever it is you're trying to build.
Sure. And one caveat there on spiritual things, we don't want to test too much, like things that we aren't sure of. in one sense, we want to have grounding in faith for that. But certainly, as you're applying wisdom in relationships, you're going to learn things that you didn't see before. And I think when I say test it out, when God makes a promise, he says, test me, try it, step out in faith that it's going to work. But I wanted to go to what you said about talking with your friends and stuff, because I think it's fascinating, the philosophers and their schools of thought and who were their students and all of this stuff, right. and how they honed their thinking and how it grew or changed over time. And then I think about the classroom. Everybody comes to math class with different experience, right? And you learn from the teacher, you learn from the book, and then you have a test. And what do people do? They get together to help each other study for the test. Or what do? They go to the math lab and get some help, right?
Yeah.
So there's these ideas. There's some that have gotten it, some that haven't gotten it yet, some that are working through it, and they're bouncing things off each other. They're working it through. In the book of the Hebrews, it says, "Don't forsake the gathering together of yourselves."
Yeah.
Right? Because it's in that group together that we encourage and that we unfold that wisdom that we're learning, and people can learn from it. So we may have talked about this in prior, but being in relationship is very key for growing in your wisdom and understanding.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I know from my own experience that when I get mired in a problem or I feel overwhelmed, my natural inclination is to withdraw, right? And to isolate, to think that somehow I'm going to work my way out of this, and that I have to work my way out of it before I can reconnect with friends, family, loved ones, whatever my community is. And I know from experience, that's exactly, that isn't wisdom. That's actually foolishness, because if I withdraw into isolation when I'm stuck, then I've actually limited myself to the possibility of working with someone, of getting advice, of being encouraged, all the things that you just said that are so valuable in the connections that we have. And so wisdom, right, in this conversation is this reminder that, hey, when you feel stuck and the tendency, the inclination is to withdraw and isolate, well, don't do that, right? That turns out to be foolish, because you're not going to get yourself out of it. The old saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, is actually tongue in cheek, because physically you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? You need someone to help you, and we're designed that way. I mean, this is again, you can see this throughout the history of humanity in so many different contexts, is that the connections, as you said, the relationships that we have are absolutely necessary for us to grow, to learn, and really to have that sense of I'm not in this alone, and so I don't have to get out of it alone, right? I do have people, and I need people to learn from and to add my learning to, so that together we can expand and grow.
Plus, it's the one that gets away from the pack that is an easy target, and they get eaten up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
We do learn from each other because we validate each other. If we're going off, somebody can encourage and help bring in more information. It's totally healthy, but isolation is it's one of the worst things.
Yeah. I think of Lord of the Rings, and Sam and Frodo are going off on this adventure, and they have no idea what they're in for, right? And they have other companions that help them through some of their challenges, but ultimately it's just the two of them that are often just doing their thing, and neither one of them has been through this before. Neither one of them knows exactly what's going to happen, and oftentimes, it seems overwhelming. We're gonna die. We have to quit. We should go home. Whatever that feeling is. And I love this idea that just being together means that Frodo has a Sam that says, "Well, I don't have the answer either, but I think together we can do this. Let's keep going," right? And sometimes just that companionship of saying, "Let's figure it out together," and that might not be. I think in the context of this conversation, that might be saying, "Hey, what do you know? What have you learned from your experience, from your reading, from your education that I have not had any exposure to, so that you can bring that to me as my connection, right? As my companion, to say, hey, have you thought of this? Have you tried this? Here's something else that has worked for me. It may not be the exact right thing for you, but at least it'll give you a different way of looking at things."
Yeah, and I also not only math class, but if history serves me right, a lot of the artists at different times, they had their coffee shop meetings, and they changed the course of art over time. Poets, and even your underground dissidents in certain nations would meet and movements would start. Dangerous, I guess.
Right.
One if by land, two if by sea.
Hey, let's get a little practical here. And so you've read a ton and you've learned a lot. Can you think of a principle, some information that has become wisdom for you, that you've gleaned from your books, has just been like very, very much a life changer? Now, I don't want to overstate it, but like it gave you a perspective that you just didn't have, and it's really helped you to navigate life now that you know what you didn't know before you got into that particular book or that particular context.
Well, I think one of the most important is one that I mentioned earlier in the conversation, was just that application of how to render oneself dead to outside attack.
Right? So accusations, criticisms, etc.
Yeah, there's a great movie called Man of God. It's about an Eastern Orthodox priest in, I think in the Middle East, and how he was a real wonderful priest, but how there was some politics involved with the new patriarch for the Orthodox, and how he gladly accepted the attacks against himself, and I won't tell you how the movie ends, but it, between that and the learning about not reacting, is very, very powerful, and it gave me a reason why, it gave me a reason how, it gave me a result, because it changes me, because it changes the one who is confronting me, It changes the situation around, and if it does nothing else, it really cleanses my person uh, from the negative attack. Because as you know, when we respond to attacks, we make things worse, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I mean, the non-wisdom is attack back, worry about it till you're depressed, anxiety, and suicidal, right?
Yeah.
Or in a fetal position, all curled up, right?
Right.
Or embrace it and let it go, which then frees up the other person who sees that what they're doing is not having effect and is actually probably wrong. It doesn't always work out, but but it helps, right? It takes the stress off of you. It gives you learning because your mouth is shut and your ears are open, which always does us a lot of good. So just the explanations of the different things. I only gave you one example, but a lot of the explanations of dying to oneself. And I mean, even in the City of God by Augustine, he talked a little bit about what are the things that that selfish mankind desire versus what divinity desires, and how what benefits and what doesn't benefit us, and how it's tied to satisfying our desires in our flesh. So I think from a spirit, the ones from the spiritual really strengthen that in me. The Civil War stuff I read really gives me a context because I live in Texas now, right?
Yeah.
And we were down in Galveston, and we saw the place where the Juneteenth celebration was first proclaimed. We learned the history about it. There's a museum there. We learned the history about it, why it was so important, and who celebrates it. And I just don't know why it's not a federal holiday. I really don't. Okay, but see that affected that learning the Civil War, learning from this exhibit, and putting it in our context, living in the South and people talking about the Texas should secede. You may have read that. There's a Texit book like Brexit.
Oh, gosh.
You really read the Civil War? Do you really know how people lost arms and limbs and siblings and parents, aunts, mainly uncles, but aunts, divided church bodies? I mean, it was hell on earth.
Yeah.
Mini hell on earth, but hell on earth, right?
Really?
Why in the world would we want to? So it gave me a lot of perspective, even how to, because in the simpleton mind, well, Texas has a rainy day fund. Texas isn't underwater. Texas can support itself. Texas has resources. Texas has people. I mean, you can go down the list, right? And you go, yeah. Well, what are these states that got deficits and things out of control? This is the conversation that you hear.
Sure.
But in my context, I'm like, you're kidding, right? I mean, like, you're kidding. Because when you put it all into perspective and you learn more about military things, history things, then you start thinking about, who's going to have treaties with us? Are we going to be NATO, or what are we? I mean, you have more context to put instead of the simple, yeah, we're strong and they're not, let's just leave. How dumb would that be?
Yeah.
But if you put it all in the context, so I've learned even from that.
It's good. It reminds me of this idea that our eyes, the receptors in our eyes, can only see a tiny percentage of the spectrum of colors that are out there to see. And science knows this because they found other creatures that have a way more receptors in their eyes. And I don't know the exact science behind it, but I understand the principle is that they can see, far more colors than we know, because we can't see them with the eyes that we've been given. But that, to me, the realization of that is a reminder that what I see, not just with the colors that are coming in, but what I see in terms of the world and how it works, and the potential solutions is such a tiny percentage of what there is to be known. And the value of what you're talking about here is getting a broader, a more comprehensive, right, perspective on what's happening now, and seeing, right, how does that attach to, and how does that relate to the historical context that brought us to where we are, both in recent history and in a broader history. Why go to that trouble, right? Because some people say, well, that's a lot of work, and I don't have time, and I don't have the interest, et cetera, et cetera. But as you have already stated, it gives you a much better understanding of how to proceed in a manner that's beneficial, right? It's beneficial not just for you, but for your family, for your community, perhaps for society at large. And I do think, as you said earlier, I think there is something in most of us that really wants to improve the quality of life, not just for ourselves, but for others. But we don't necessarily know how to do that, or our understanding is limited. And so I just love this challenge, right, to expand my vision, expand my vision. And I can't do that with my own eyes. I got to do that by understanding what others have seen, and not just the ones that are alive today, but the ones that have gone through it and really took a look, right, at their own context, and was able to leave wisdom behind for all of us.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason that we have liberal arts and you have general education as part of your degree program, because you need to know you need to have experience with a wide set of knowledge. Because if all you knew was one little thing and knew it well, that's great. That's what we call specialization. That's what we call, PhD type of work, right?
Expertise, yeah,
Okay.
right.
But that doesn't come without the level of expanding yourself first. Although by the time you get the PhD and you really get into it, your hair's like Einstein, and you forget to shower and stuff like that, right? Oh wait, I must be brilliant. Okay, anyways, you said you weren't so great on science, and I just realized, did I say that in the Civil War they lost arms and limbs?
Arms and limbs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
See,
both.
there you go. I'm an idiot. I need to study medical. I need to study anatomy. But and what you've said about the colors is just blows my mind, because I've always thought about this, about what the other stuff we can't see.
Yeah.
What if when we get to heaven, the grass is actually blue? That would be so crazy.
Yeah.
The bananas were like red. I mean, what would happen to my taste buds?
Right. Well, speaking of other authors, one of the authors that I love is C.S. Lewis, and I'm sure you've read plenty of his stuff. And he does make a case, that what we experience on this earth is like a really dim, kind of fuzzy version of what heaven might be like, right? And that it's going to be so much clearer and more real than what we've experienced. And I think that, again, the limitations of what my eyes can see is that reminder that, hey, what you have experienced through your five senses helps you understand your context in this moment, but there is so much more to know, so much more to understand. And so I guess that can get overwhelming, right? If there's so much more, there's so much out there that I don't even know where to start. But perhaps what I would throw out into this conversation is, there's no right direction, there's no wrong direction. There's so much to learn. Just be curious, right? Ask the questions. And I love the fact that question itself has quest built right into it, and see questions as this childlike curiosity that we all have. When I was raising my kids, their favorite question was always, why daddy, why? And whatever answer I gave them was always followed up, yeah, but why? And so I think there's that natural tendency in us that we do want to understand more, and to cultivate, to tie back into that natural curiosity that's built into us, that somehow gets dormant as we get older, and we just get tired, and we don't want to have to do the work. But maybe it's not work. Maybe it's fun, right? The curiosity of wanting to see what I cannot see by asking the questions, both of those that I can talk to and those that I can read about.
Yeah. And I think along with what you're saying, and in agreement, is you start where you're at.
Yeah.
I know it's the beginning is a very great place to start, and
Right.
where's the beginning? The beginning is where you're at,
Yeah.
and not to judge yourself against other people. That doesn't help, because you know if you're really going for it or not. The only place not to start where you're at is like as if you're in Death Valley. Don't start there. Get in a car, go to San Diego, and start there because it'll be a lot better. But start where you're at.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, in the last few minutes we have, Jeff, let's do a hypothetical. Let's say you're um, getting towards the end of your life on this planet, ready to step into something glorious that we can't see at the moment. But you want to leave behind a wisdom, that's something that you've learned along the way, either through your own experience and or what you've read. What is a really important thing that you've learned, right? One of these lessons that has been really transformative in your life beyond what we've talked about, the accusation thing, which I think was really good reminder. But what's some wisdom that you would want to leave behind once your body gets glorified?
Well, and you understand that this is I have to speak out of what is most near and dear to me.
Of course.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so it's simple yet complex. But what I would say is there's more out there than what we know. And we need to be humble and we need to seek it out and not think that we just know everything on our own.
Mm.
And to there's more out there than what you understand, and be humble and seek it out.
Yeah, seeking. That's such a good thing. Seeking and questions, those go hand in hand, right? It is a quest. Yeah, and I think that too. That's a reminder to me, Jeff, as I'm listening to you talk, is that there's something in us that likes certainty, even though that really is an illusion. And so, not being afraid of what I don't know, but rather being curious and wanting to add to the knowledge that I've received more, not just so that I know more, right? Because knowledge, as we have been taught, knowledge can puff us up and make us actually less humble, right? But uh, learning both what we, adding to our learning, not to be smarter, right? But to understand what I don't know, knowing more about what I don't know, and then finding ways to apply that and to share that with the next generation, with those around us, those that are in our sphere of influence. And so, as you were talking about humility, I was remembering I heard Jordan Peterson talking about Jacob wrestling with God. There's a famous story in the Bible about Jacob wants a blessing. An angel shows up, and we're not sure exactly what that means, but they wrestle, and then towards the end, Jacob's hip gets put out of joint, but he receives the blessing. In fact, he's appointed almost like the father of the children of Israel. Gets that new name, right? And Jordan Peterson was talking about this idea of wrestling with God is a really great metaphor for this opportunity that we all have to learn more about our context and our Creator and the world that we live in, and who we are, requires this dose of humility, almost as a reminder of who I am in the context of of it all, right? That there's these two threads going on in our lives all the time, Jeff. One is that we're like as insignificant as a grain of sand in the giant cosmological view. However, we're also the most important grain of sand, right, in the view of the person that created, in the one that created us. Or as I like to say in a much more simpler terms, I say often, hey, I'm God's favorite, but then again, so are you, right? And as a parent, I understand what that means. I love each of my children because of my relationship with them and how interesting and specific and beautiful that is. And it's, as you said, no judgments, no comparisons. It's not better or worse, more loving or less loving than my other children. It's very specific to them. And so how in the grand context of things, it can seem insignificant But on the other hand, it is supremely significant because you and I were created to be who we are and who we are becoming in every moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I just want to thank you, Jeff, for sharing the wisdom that you're gathering, for sharing your life, for being my friend, right? The connections that we can share together and wrestle with ideas and see how does that apply. And I just want to encourage anybody who's tuned in. First of all, thank you for your time and your attention, and encourage you to expand your understanding, expand your vision, expand your relationships. Again, not so that you can boast about that, but so that you can grow and realize that there's so much more out there than we are aware of. So until next time, we're just going to dig in uh, and continue this great dialogue. So thank you, Jeff. I hope you have a beautiful day, a beautiful week, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
All right, you as well.